I'm down near Reading. I'm at Richard Thorne Classic Cars and I'm with Richard Thorne. This morning I spent a very pleasurable time, having stepped back almost 75 years, or so it seems, and I've been driving this little beauty. But I have to say I don't know very much about it. Richard, what can you tell me about this car?
Well, it's an interesting one in that we believe it to be the very first four-seater, four-wheeler Morgan of course, three-wheelers having four seats before that. It's led a very interesting history, but was the original prototype and was run by the accountant to the Morgan Motor Company for a number of years afterwards.
Brian had given me a live commentary on his drive, but back in 1937 nobody told them about noise interference on digital cameras, surprisingly enough.
This is just sublime. Steering is very responsive. That's interesting on the cross-blind tyres, but turn corners, just a little bit more effort required on the steering. It seems to sort of, I feel the back end moving around a little bit. I can think of no better way of spending a sunny autumn morn looking out at this very beautifully restored 1930s four-seater Morgan four-wheel. It's absolutely wonderful.
It spent a great deal of time in the US and was taken out to the US by a US serviceman, but for very many years it was owned by Mr. Schmidt, and he owned it and loved it and eventually restored it.
And how long did it take him to restore it?
I think the story in the magazine that we have says nearly 30 years in all.
And what sort of condition was it in when he decided to start the restoration?
I think it was basically, from what I can glean from the article, then it was all there, but obviously even at that stage it was a very elderly car indeed, and considerable work was needed to bring it back up to the state that you see it in today. A lot of those parts did come, of course, from the UK, and that's probably partly why also it took a fair bit of time in amongst family life. Certainly we know that the body tub, and which was reskinned and new, the frame if you like, that definitely came from Morgan. George Proudfoot, of course, who's the doyen of Climax cars, had a lot to do with the engine side of it. And so I think, yes, a lot of the parts that were required did come from England, but then I don't suppose there's an awful lot of Climax information or parts available in the US. Certainly in Morgan terms, and indeed the sort of vintage and 30s era, cars were generally, weren't they, very much more simple than they are today, and the Morgan particularly so. I think the fact that the Morgan Club and associated specialists here in the UK find a means of solving any of the problems that come along, that's helped a lot of people around the Morgan world, all over the world. So I don't think it was a particularly difficult thing to do, but it's never easy when you're umpteen thousand miles away, of course.
Do we know when it actually came from the US to the UK?
Strictly, very recently indeed. It was actually acquired by a famous world collector of Morgans, Adrian Vandercroft, in '99. And he brought it to Europe, but strictly speaking it's only been in the UK when Adrian very kindly asked me to sell it on his behalf.
With the current model, how many would you say are sold, or what percentage of cars, these four-seater cars, do you think are being sold at the moment?
Well, they've always been, I think, well under 10% of the overall production. You know, the Morgan families, the owners' families, are a very important part of the whole picture. And I think those with children, wouldn't want to be without a four-seater as an option in the range. We still sell regularly, 3 or 4 or 5 four-seaters in the course of a year, when we would normally sell into the 40s and up to maybe 50 new cars. So they're still very popular for people that have young children, and I know my girls grew up in a four-seater and absolutely adored it and love Morgans to this day because of it. So I hope that the trend will continue, that we'll keep on making four-seaters for a very long time to come.
Richard, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed my time down here near Reading, and I've particularly enjoyed having the opportunity to drive this really special car. So thank you very much for your time.
Oh, you're very welcome, Brian. Good to see you.
Then I set a small task for Brian. Having filmed from the back of both of these cars, I had a feeling there was more room in the back of the old car than the new one.
Right, let's see just how much space we've got for the passengers in the back here. I would say that's about 35 inches, which looks quite generous, that. Right, so that's about 22 there. So let's go and see what difference 75 years makes. So across here, passengers have now got, I would say that's about 43. And what about this side? Oh, that's quite a bit less. I'd say, should say there's no more than about 20 there. I have to admit, that's a little bit surprising.
So if you take into account the 10-inch wide covering of the drive shaft in the new car, it means there's less room in the back of that new one than the old one. A clear winner.